game-changing. He said, I have saved thousands every month versus running a diesel to running an electric vehicle.
I've always worked in innovation, so I actually am drawn to innovative things, new things, confusing things, boundary-pushing things. But the majority of people I know are not. They just want to feel confident in the choice that they've made.
With the battery health as well, we're seeing that batteries are staying healthier for longer.
Because it really is true. If you've had the opportunity to test drive something, then you get to understand what works for you.
Hello and welcome to the Talk Auto podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Holly, and every month we get industry experts on the podcast to talk about all the latest in automotive. And this month we've got yet another exciting topic, as ever.
Yeah, indeed. I know we say that every month,
We do.
but it is true. This month we're going to be talking about the hugely prevalent topic of EV adoption and trying to squash some of the myths and customer perceptions.
We have two fantastic guests joining us this month. How are you both?
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting us on.
I feel like this is going to be a lot of fun, taking the conversation through many levels.
Exactly. So I'm delighted to introduce Paul Humphreys, who is Managing Director at Retail at Cox Automotive, and Sara Sloman, Chief Strategy Officer at Paythru. We're delighted to have you on. We're very much, as you say, excited to have a good conversation with you guys. But just before we dive in, it'd be great to just get a really quick overview of your roles, your experience in automotive, and why you're on the podcast today talking about EVs. Sara, should we start with you?
Oh, thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. One of the reasons I wanted to come is it kind of gives both perspectives from different ends of the industry. And I am celebrating because this is my 22nd year in sustainable transport infrastructure. So I think I've seen it all, but I'm here to learn too.
Yeah, 22 years is it's a long time in the industry, especially when we're talking about EVs and sustainability. And it does prove that, it's not just happened in the last 5-10 years. It's been going for a lot longer. So lovely to have you on. And Paul?
So I've been in the automotive business for about 14 years, but my background is really about consumer facing businesses. So my passion is really about making sure that the general public can get access to the things that they need to get access in a really clear way. So I'm really interested about what you've got to say around Paythru. So yeah, great to be here.
Fantastic. Now, we've talked a fair bit about EVs on this podcast. We've dipped into plenty of different topics, education, charging, myths. But this month, we're really going to take a deep dive into the topic. Now, one of the reasons why we thought this was a good month to do it is obviously we've had the recent budget a few months ago now. However, it's really, it's had some policies to do with EVs, and we've also got the ever-present ZEV mandate as well, which now that we're into 2026, we can discuss, what the differences are like in 2025.
We can. So, I think, there are huge rises for the ZEV mandate, zero emission vehicles for those guys that maybe need a little hand with an acronym here or there. 2026, there's going to need to be a big step up and a lot of focus on how manufacturers get to those values. So just to touch on sort of 2025, vans, the target was 16%. They achieved 9%. With a general sort of market decline of around 10% in general. Cars, target was 28. They achieved approximately 24. So the gap for cars seems to be, getting quite close. But if you compare the figures that we had last year to this year, vans is 24% and cars is 33%. Not to mention, there's the shifting landscape in Europe as well, with those guys pushing out their deadlines. So, yeah, we really want to help the sort of retail network understand how they can help in this transition. So, off the back of that, sort of Cox Automotive surveyed just over sort of 2,000 people to get their views on the EV landscape. So, yeah, that's sort of set the scene, I guess, for everyone here.
And I think that report's really interesting because, Paul, I'm going to ask you, because I know you spoke on Radio 4 recently about this report and kind of the findings from it. Well, actually, you tell us the findings from it. That's probably the best way, isn't it?
Thanks, Holly, Ben. I think the key thing really is what's evident is that there's a big gap between reality and perception. Mm-hmm. So consumers who are not familiar with electric vehicles have a wariness about what works and what doesn't work. They are still scared about range. They're still worried about public charging infrastructure. They're just not sure. Yet those people who do use electric vehicles are very confident about these things. So as you get familiar with an electric vehicle, you'll know, Sarah, you've been in electric vehicles for however many years, you get much more comfortable with those positions. And actually that educating the general public in what does work, I think is really important for both the retail network and the manufacturers to really get on board with, to tell people, don't be scared, don't worry about it. You can get on the journeys you need to get to. You're not going to be sat waiting for a vehicle to charge for hours on end. And it's really about that education point. It's critical, I think.
Education and exposure as well,
Yeah.
exposure to EVs. And I think one of the things that even came out of the report is even if you test drive an EV, so maybe you don't purchase it, but you go for a test drive, even your perceptions change just with that. Sarah, have you got anything to add around that?
Yeah, instantly. We call it bums on seats. It's perfectly fine to say that on air, because it really is true. If you've had the opportunity to test drive something, then you get to understand what works for you. And I think that's the critical thing here, is the early adopters, as we're known, those who are tech savvy and potentially have facilities like driveways, who are willing to test the water and go ahead. And then these iterations mean that the vehicles that are around today are a lot better than they were. Trust me, only 5 years ago, the maximum range was like 100 miles before you had to recharge, and there wasn't very many chargers at the time. Now they are everywhere. The aim for the industry is to, wherever you park, to be able to charge. So instead of having to rigorously plan your journey, you should frequently see, whether it's a hotel, leisure centre, car park, or on the motorway network, rapid chargers where you're only there for 10, 15 minutes before carrying on. So it's super convenient now. And I love that movement. And we know that from clients like ZapMap, they surveyed 4,500 or so, and over 90% of people who went EV won't go back.
I think our report found 95% of people that went EV won't go back.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a huge amount, and bums on seats is clearly the way to go, isn't it?
Yeah, there is. There's one really important piece of the puzzle that I do so feel is missing, and that's when the consumers had all of this amazing marketing, all these wonderful stories from their friends and family, and bad ones too, and they perhaps go to the dealership network and ask the questions. I hear on a daily basis, unfortunately still today, difficult sales engagement, whether that's the targets at that individual place, or whether that's they've brought with them a kind of guard up scenario, or perhaps the person that's selling the vehicle has a guard up scenario. Nobody's trying to send the consumer away unhappy. They've just got it in their head and their heart that that's not the right vehicle for them. And it turns out that it's usually something quite ridiculous. And I have a real example. A die-hard diesel fan had a Volkswagen van for 15 years and wanted the new buzz, wanted all 70, 80, 90 grand of it, but just was talked out of it by the person at the dealership.
Really?
Yes, they went next door and bought the Kia PV5, the first electric experience that person had ever had. And now him and his partner, that's their sole vehicle. So half the price, just as good looking, multiple awards coming out of its many doors. And it was all down to the customer service that changed the brand after 15 years.
Wow. I mean, that one insight, that is it. I think when we talk about these myths, it's consumer, but it's also retailer, isn't it? And it's these perceptions that EVs are not the natural next choice. And I mean, when we talk about consumer myths anyway, I mean, there's so many. And it is.
There is, yeah. And I think, Paul, you mentioned it, it's that shifting the perception and getting people to understand the reality of it. What is their experience pre and post EV? I, to be honest, am a big petrol head, a big car fan. I was reluctant to move into an EV until I test drove one. And as soon as I did, I was like, well, this, it's fantastic. And I've been in one for, 2.5 years now, which is really good. Now, obviously, going back to that perception and reality, you find that as soon as someone does test drive it, they get over a lot of their range issues. They get over the fact that it is just a completely different vehicle to drive. As part of your role, Sarah, I just wanted to understand sort of what it is you guys do at Paythru, trying to make EVs easier to charge, that sort of thing, and what the data signals around that sort of range anxiety and how the industry is moving forward.
Thank you. I'd love to go into it. So we're very data-led. Paythru is a company that works in the financial services part of the EV ecosystem. So we call ourselves the orchestrator of EV payments. So when you get to that machine, your charger, and you've got multiple ways to pay and yet you don't know which one to choose, we want to better that. We want to make it more consistent. We want to make things like, you might have heard of the pre-authorization, where you have a hold amount on your card, but it can be very confusing to the consumer. They think that's their payment. They think they've paid that for their charging when, it says £45, but really all they took was 10. So it's difficult for the consumer to understand that. Paythru is all about making that consumer journey easier when they get to the charge point. So we're one very important part. We're the consumer-facing part, but behind the scenes the whole time. So yeah, we've got grand plans with sort of global backing from Adyen Bank to make that spot on, affordable price for everybody, and to really work with government as well to get that confusion layers lower.
It's that education piece again, isn't it?
I call it awareness. That education's interesting as a concept because if you feel uneducated, then there's a leveling there. It feels like I'm educated and you're not. And that's not the angle I try to take. I think awareness is a really important difference to make. It's a very sort of smooth process as opposed to you are now educated, go EV. It's an iterative process. It takes time. And that experience is everything. And having a feedback loop and having neighbours you can chat to. And I really enjoy this concept called pub chat. If you're down the pub and they're talking about it, it's probably on their mind for real, not because it has to be. And I think the more positive messages, the more real case studies we can get out there, the myths will dissipate.
Yeah, exactly. And Paul, when we talk about, I guess, from a consumer point of view, or potentially even a retailer point of view, myths around EVs and how that's affecting adoption, how that's affecting perception, what's kind of your stance on kind of how we address that? What, awareness is clearly not education. I shall correct my language now, and it will be awareness from now on, because it's a really good point. It's building, it's bums on seats, it's driving, it's seeing them, it's looking at the charging infrastructure. How do you think we address that?
Well, I think there's a number of things that we need to do. I think your point about awareness and experience is a really critical one. Is how do we enable consumers to get into an EV, to drive one, to try one, to experience it? And I do think that the industry maybe needs to think about test drives in a slightly different way, because for an EV, I think it's a different experience. It's not just about going around the block for 20 minutes. You need a bit more time. You need to understand what it takes to go and charge the vehicle, because I think there's I think you would use the word guardedness, and there is a guardedness for consumers who aren't experiencing EV. I pull it to a charger, what do I do? How do I get this thing to put electricity into my car? And as a first timer, it's a little bit daunting, because it's not something you do every day. It's not the same as going to a petrol pump and filling up as people are used to. But there was a first time somebody did that as well, and the first time you did that was unusual. So I think the whole experience driving of test drive and getting people into it, I think needs to change. I think there needs to be a little bit more acceptance and understanding from a retailer to a consumer point of view that this is different, and we need to talk to them about different things than we would normally talk about an ICE vehicle or a traditional vehicle.
Now, I have a question for you guys, because I am actually at the moment in a situation where I need a new car. So my car was sadly written off last week. Very sad, not my fault, I swear. It was parked in a car park, okay? And yet, I am kind of, I would say, what I would call the ideal consumer at the moment, which is my old ICE vehicle has reached the end of its life, sadly. But now I'm the kind of person who's now looking for a new car. And I think I'm the exact type of consumer who would be targeted for EVs and even, potentially hybrids. But I also think I'm kind of the typical consumer, because even I have some kind of reservations. So I meet industry experts. We've done this podcast for a while now. I work in automotive industry. So I'd say I have that awareness piece. I know that people absolutely rave about EVs. But, in terms of barriers to adoption, I live in a flat in a city centre. I don't have a driveway. I don't drive too much. My drive to work is less than 20 minutes. But when I do drive, for example, today I drove about 140 miles to get here. And I also have had experience with an older EV, so a 2018 plate. And I know from that experience that potentially the range wasn't as good, the charging infrastructure as well, maybe 2-3 years ago, a bit of an issue. So what would you say to a consumer like me? Because I imagine this is actually quite a few people in the country at the moment who, they're getting to the end of their life of their ICE car, and maybe they know and they hear from, you absolutely rave about your Tesla, that they're fantastic cars now. What would you say to give consumers like me some confidence in kind of purchasing a second-hand or first-hand EV?
I think from a second-hand point of view, again, this is an issue that some consumers have about a worry about battery safety and battery life. But we know actually they are very safe. Some years ago, there was lots of stories about incidents of fire with EVs, and you don't hear about that anymore. Things have been addressed and things have been changed. With the battery health as well, we're seeing that batteries are staying healthier for longer than people ever really anticipated. We see battery technology improving every year. Every time a new EV comes out, or never mind a new EV, whether a software update for an EV comes out, can improve the battery health and the battery life. And they are not degrading in the way that people thought. That has not yet reflected into used values. So used EVs are remarkably good value for a consumer at the moment. There is a bit of a misalignment between ICE vehicles and EVs in terms of the residual values from a new vehicle to a used vehicle. But I think that will adjust over time as people become more used to it. So what advice would I give to a potential EV buyer, which I am as well, by the way? I'm about to make the change.
Very true.
And so for me, it's about that awareness, that understanding. Go drive some, right? Drive a few. See if you can get an extended test drive from a dealership. Experience it for a weekend where you have to do all of the things that you need to do with an EV and enjoy the positives of it as well. So I would encourage more usage.
Okay.
I'd say you're already doing the right thing, just thinking about your own preferences, your situation, your circumstance, your budget. People also have a bad habit of looking at a ticket price of an EV rather than the total cost of ownership piece.
That's a very good point.
You have to think about how many miles you do over a year. Yours is very low mileage.
Yeah.
And as you progress through, you'll realise that, wherever you park, there'll be many, many chargers available. So you don't need a home charger. I myself, 20,000 miles a year, and I don't have access to a home charger for 90% of that time. Yeah. So for me, it's been completely at the mercy of the developing public charging network. And even on that 140-mile journey, you'd have passed ones that you didn't even know were there. So when you get an EV, you become extremely good at spotting them. And there's different brands, like everything. You're going to have a brand preference. Some people like a quirky car. Some people like a really sort of subtle car. Some people like bells and whistles, and other people like big screens. You have to get to the nuts and bolts of what you really want. There are so many models out there. So it's a budget thing, it's a habit thing, a lifestyle thing. And I completely agree with you. When you first ever got in a car and had to do what? Fill it up with petrol? That's crazy. What does that even mean? What do I need, unleaded or diesel? Or what's this one that's twice the price? I don't get it. Yeah. So no, there's always going to be help along the road. And it's nice that now with market penetration over 25% of newly registered vehicles, that's a big proportion that we're going to see on the roads. The green license plate, you start to see those everywhere. Yeah. And you realise you're not alone. It's about having a community, feeling like you're not doing something weird. You're actually just buying another car.
Yeah. Actually, your point there to not having home access to a home charger for 90% of the time, to me is actually the most compelling point. Because I think, so many people in this country, in Europe, live either in a flat or in a terraced house, or just a house that doesn't have a driveway. And to me, I perceive that as probably the biggest barrier. But to know that even if you're buying an EV, say that's 5 years old, maybe it has a range of 150, 200, maybe more, that actually, if you're doing 20,000 miles a year and you're relying heavily on the public charging network, and you're not seeing too many issues? Any issues?
I haven't seen any issues. I just wanted to illustrate it with a cost-based example. So I bought a diesel, 7-seater, had 3 kids to shove in the back, and I thought that was the right thing to do for the environment because that's what we were told. So I sold my petrol to buy the diesel, and then EV came along in my career path. So it was super early doors. We put our first charger in 2010 in the Bristol region. So I've been seeing it evolve very slowly. I'm a spreadsheet fan, guys. Geeks unite. I love it. I did all the numbers and I realised that the total cost of ownership with diesel versus EV was about the same. And now it's still about the same. The pence per mile is about the same with all the incentives and benefits. And there's even nearly $4,000 off a brand new model. But I do think that second-hand market has been slightly skewed because when I first got EV, I swapped it out every year or so, just got another one. Yep. One of them I sold for what I paid for it, which is fantastic. So now we've got this strange dip in the market where I've held on to my car for 4 years when I thought I'd get rid of it after 2. So a lot of the models are predicated on people like me who are supposed to give their car back, but saw nothing wrong with it. It didn't degrade. The new technology wasn't impressive enough to make me shift. And that's the other trigger. We all want new shiny stuff. We all get the new iPhone. We all get the new laptop. I don't, but a lot of people do. And I didn't think I'd hold on to this car for this long. And so I've not flooded the second-hand market like everyone expected people like me to do. So hold on, there will be more to come.
I think that point about total cost of ownership is a really important one as well. It's like through the research that we did, we showed that the whole public charging so-called issue is much more prevalent for those people who don't drive EVs. A third of people who don't drive EVs felt that, 2/3 felt that the public charging network was inappropriate. But only 1 in 10 of EV drivers thought it was anything but great. So it's that experience point. And even talking about the actual running costs of an EV versus an ICE vehicle, the general maintenance is much lower. You've got much fewer moving parts. There's much less to fix, much less to go wrong. And even if you are charging on a public network all the time, you're still getting an equivalent MPG of a thrifty diesel, even if you're paying public charging rates all the time. If you charge at home, then that goes exponentially higher, but it's still not more expensive. A little story, I was in a a taxi coming home from the airport the other day, and the taxi driver was in a diesel.
At least you had a driver.
Yeah. The taxi driver was in a diesel. And I said, I always talk to taxi drivers about their cars. I'm a little bit fascinated in taxis about how many miles has your car done. Anyway, he went into this story about, this isn't my usual car. I'm just borrowing this one because my Tesla was in for a service. I said, oh, you do airport runs day in, day out, and you drive an EV. And he was like, oh, he said, game changing. He said, I have saved thousands every month versus running a diesel through running an electric vehicle as a taxi driver who's doing, never mind 20,000 miles a year, who's probably doing 100,000 miles a year.
Exactly.
And just that, somebody who is using it every day, literally all day, every day, and they are seeing the savings.
If you've got a driveway and you can benefit from flexible energy pricing tariffs at home, then yeah, you can bring that. So at motorway services, you'll pay 89 pence per kilowatt hour, sometimes reduced by 10p if you're a member of the app or you've got a promo code. It doesn't really matter. And in fact, I was out the other day, just up this way, Birmingham way, and there was 3 charging providers in one essentially car park, the service station area, and there's 46 chargers to choose from. And of the 3 brands, the price differential was 39p to 89p. So there's 50 pence difference in it.
Wow.
So it really helps to shop around if you can't charge home. But we're in that market penetration phase of people who have driveways went for this. There's a lot of EV people have driveways, so they're not even using the public network hardly as much as they would or should. But those who are fleet users, and that's an area of my expertise, is a lot of the vehicles expected on the road are due to be fleet vehicles. We as consumers don't really own vehicles anymore. We prefer to lease rather than buy. So the fleet drivers are the ones who know what they're doing, and they just tap and go. So they don't look at the price. It's all billed back through their main organisation. Whereas for a homeowner, it's critical to understand your own cost model, and that may sway your choice.
It will. I think very interesting point you made there. Right, in one car park, 46 chargers, and the price varying between 39p and 89p.
Correct.
How as a consumer, how do you get that information easily and clearly to know that you haven't plugged into the wrong charger and paying 89p instead of 39p?
Well, there's no such thing as a wrong charger because you can pay for convenience as well. So, you might want a super fast charge. If you understand your vehicle, that's another pro tip for anybody going EV. Don't be charmed by up to 350 kilowatts of energy on this charger, big posters that say that. That will mean nothing to you if you have a smaller vehicle that can't onboard that quickly. So I know my car, I know it caps out at sort of 220. So for me to use a 300 kilowatt charger, I'm in. That's good. I'll pay my 89p. But the real sweet spot's around that 50 kilowatt. You can go in for half an hour, do whatever you're going to do, answer emails, do whatever you want, and you'll come back to a significant charge, and it won't be as much as the expensive one. So you're paying for convenience on the motorway services. Now, something I like to do is look to use hotels that have overnight charging. That's usually much, much cheaper. And all these differences mean savings for you when you're away from home.
I guess what would be interesting to that point is obviously the government's just released the fuel cost kind of lookup.
The fuel price tracker.
That's it. Thank you,
petrol
Ben.
and diesel.
I was hoping you might bring that up.
That's the proper word for it. But that might be nice, and essential probably, if when we look to the future to have that for charging points.
It's the other way around. So why I love this story, so we do the EV Cafe News on a Friday, and I made sure this story was in, and thanks to John Curtis for including it as our host. But the Competition Markets Authority has got involved in petrol and diesel prices, saying that petrol and diesel drivers should know if there is a somewhere 5 minutes away that's cheaper. They have a right to know. So now a previously very non-digital market space has been forced to go digital. In EV, we have always had that. Our vehicles direct us to charges. Our apps tell us if there's a price plunge. And this is what we will see with the connected car. And that's the other huge advantage of electric vehicles. They are super tech savvy. So you could program your vehicle, perhaps even with agentive AI, in just a few years' time and say to it, never take me to a charger that is more than 150 kilowatt in power, and never take me to a charger that's more than 75 pence per kilowatt hour. Don't want to know. Don't do it. And so you can control your driving experience way more than you ever could with driving past a petrol or diesel station.
It's got the tech built in.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love a bit of tech.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And how convenient as well. Super convenient. Now, kind of switching gears a little bit to talk about the retailer space. So obviously we've talked about consumer there quite a lot. Looking at myths for retailers and the barriers that retailers perceive, and of course you've already brought up, your friend wanting to buy an EV van and being kind of almost turned away.
And there's always one bad example and 50
yeah,
good. Let's be clear about that.
Of course. And I mean, the adoption rate increase shows that there is, of course, a bit more amenability there. I was talking to, about 2 years ago, I interviewed 2 women of a now award-winning dealership in Birmingham called Wink Cars. They're a small dealership. They often have a kind of lower price stock, small forecourts, and at the time they had just sold their first EV. And it was a Mini, and they said, to me in the interview, they really struggled to sell it. They said it was, kind of matched their stock profile. It was a small car, but they struggled to kind of get it off the forecourt. So I got back in touch with them recently for this podcast, and I thought, I'll see how that's changed. And I thought they were going to say, oh yeah, we stock one now and again, maybe a Renault Zoe or something like that. And they said they've actually not stocked one since.
Oh, really?
And I said, why? And they said, well, it doesn't match our stock profile, which, to be fair, they're older vehicles, again, maybe sub 10K, smaller vehicles. And they said there's just not the demand. And so I think it's an interesting point to see just that first-hand retailer experience. And of course, there's retailers of every kind, and maybe you wouldn't go to them for an EV. You'd go to someone maybe a bit bigger, stocking newer vehicles. But I would have expected to see the trickle down by now of, the smaller, maybe older EVs. Why do you think potentially some retailers still kind of have those, if it's mental barriers or, they believe that it doesn't match the need or the demand? What would you say to those retailers and almost encourage them to stock EVs?
I mean, using that particular example you gave there, I'd almost turn that question back around to them. Is the demand really not there? Or are you just not educated enough as a retailer to be able to service that demand? And I think we talked about it earlier. It's about retailers will have to behave differently when selling an EV. To your point about your friend that went in for a ID Buzz.
It's one of many examples,
I'm
by
sure.
the way. Yeah, it's hard.
I'm sure,
It's hard.
the salesperson probably didn't feel properly equipped to handle that sale. And so the education piece has got to start with those people who will be educating the consumer that comes in. So it's beholden on the industry to make sure that the people that work in the industry understand and that they aren't prevailing the same myths that exist already, but are able to help people gain that awareness and gain that experience to overcome those potential challenges that aren't necessarily there. So I think the education has got to start with the educators, if that makes sense. And the educators in the industry are those people that are talking about vehicles, whether that be a website that you would go to for a trusted review, whether it's a dealership you're going to go into to inquire about a vehicle. Those people have to be equipped to be able to deal with it.
Learn and do and show and tell, I think, is a really important thing. Don't forget, we are really early. When you said, don't you think the penetration would have been there by now? I shook my head. No, I don't.
You did look.
I'm not ready for that.
Yeah.
That's great that, was it Wink? Award-winning. Brilliant. Keep doing what you're doing. You're serving a really important part of society who want a car under 10K in value. And yes, the second-hand market will get there, but it won't be this year because the original EVs that are going through that second-hand cycle were very pricey in the first place. Again, the ticket price, not the ownership price. So I'm not anticipating that, but if we see the influx, the doubling of volume of smaller, cheaper vehicles from, say, China and the imports and everything at the show last year was a lot about the Chinese brands. And so it should be high-quality kit that's been behind the scenes for years. Yeah. And now they've just gone, we're going to badge that up and sell it ourselves. And good, bring it on, because those are what we call the smaller battery vehicles with the lower range, suited for city driving and a lower budget. People like me that drive a lot, you're going to need a bigger battery pack. You're going to have to pay for the bigger battery pack. It's absolutely fine. Horses for courses. I really enjoy seeing people learning from these things. You've got to give a shout out to the EV rally that travels around the UK every year. And every year they make it harder for themselves. Every year. And we get dealers along, and that's why we do it. So they get a chance to speak to real people experiencing the harder end of the going EV argument. And then it just becomes more of a conversation rather than a fact sheet that gets read out. Do you know what else? People aren't buying electric vehicles necessarily from a forecourt environment. They might go and touch it, feel it, look at it, sit in it. But I've been encouraging something called hire before you buy. You can get a lot of electric vehicles from Europe Car or others where you can hire it for a couple of weeks, really give it a run for its money with no home charger. And if you can crack that, then you're going to love being an EV customer. I would love to see a step further though. Imagine if you were partnered with a dealership network, someone like Europe Car Enterprise or whoever, and when you can prove that you hired a vehicle and went on to buy one, you get your hire back in terms of money. So you can't expect a dealership to give extended loans out for a long time, more than a couple of days maybe. But you're right, if you're not getting the recharge, discharge, long journey, short journey, supermarket hop, kids to school, you're not having a real experience. And buying online is huge. If you just see a car you want, you'll take a chance on it and go and get it. Click, don't like it, return it. Okay. It's such an amazing online digital marketplace for EV.
We're going to have to keep an eye out now to see if anyone steals that idea from you.
Yeah.
I want them to, but I want royalties.
We have already been talking to dealers about exactly that concept
Fantastic.
and it happens in some markets in Europe as well, where there is this kind of hire before you buy. And I think, it comes back to that awareness, understanding, and experience that you talked about earlier, and enabling that, I think, is critical. I think one of the great changes we've seen in the last couple of years is the choice that consumers have now. The choice of EVs that's out there, with the new market entrants coming into the market, with existing brands really building a portfolio of EVs, there is an EV for everybody now, and that wasn't always the case. You either had your very short range, cheaper cars, or you had your expensive big batteries, and there was a big gap in the middle there, which is being filled with lots of different brands now. So the choice is now much better for consumers than it ever was.
I'm interested to know, you've just mentioned that you're switching to EV.
My plan is to switch in March. Yeah.
How did you purchase that car?
I bought a second-hand car because that's what I do. I prefer to see somebody else have the depreciation first.
A smart choice.
I'm not a leaser of vehicles. I like to own my vehicles, and I always buy something that is a couple of years old, keep it for a couple of years, and then move it on. My experience has been interesting. That the sort of brands I'm interested in buying are more about the driving experience than necessarily the technology and everything else. So my experience in dealership was quite similar to buying an ICE vehicle. The experts in the dealership told me the things I wanted to know about the car. They kind of know that I understand this stuff as well, and don't necessarily need a huge amount of education around electric vehicle and charging and so on. But the focus was very much about the vehicle, the driving experience, not about the technology and the battery and the charging and everything else, which I think is a miss. Because whilst I might understand and might know, by not properly explaining things like you just said about, when you go to a service station on a motorway, make sure you pick your charger wisely for what you need. Those sorts of things I think are missing from that buying journey.
So did you go into a dealership for it?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And did you test drive?
Many.
Extended test drive? Or
Yeah, we had a weekend.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that's clearly the kind of route
I think
to
it makes a
isn't
difference,
it?
yeah. It makes a huge difference, experiencing it. And, and I've had EVs as hire cars and rentals for a number of times. I've used them for, a couple of weeks at a time. And, it can sometimes be frustrating if you are not familiar. And I think it's that familiarity that can be a problem for a first-time purchaser, which is that I don't know what I'm doing here. And until you do get to know, then I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and this is something I wanted to touch on as well. Is it's that broader sort of education, sort of awareness piece that we've touched on. From a retailer point of view, you've given your first-hand experience. They were talking about the car, the way it drives, rather than maybe the changes in your lifestyle that you might need to make. There's one particular sort of second-hand retailer that's really popular across social media as well, and actually they seem to be doing a lot around that sort of awareness piece. R. Simmons, I'm sure most people have seen them dotted around the place. They buy their own cars new, road test them for a month, put on a couple of thousand miles, and they've also recently been sort of pottering around in some older cars that have got 300,000-400,000 miles, and actually trying to challenge the myth that a battery is only as good as the charge that you're putting into it. As soon as it gets to 99%, then that's it. You need to sort of scrap the car and look at something else. So yeah, it's really interesting to see what other areas of marketing, I guess, and bits and pieces that people are sort of leaning on to try and get people to make that transition.
I don't think you just look out at any kind of used car or new car kind of search, and electric is not. I think there's an opportunity for the industry to push harder, to really kind of lean people into it and make sure that the availability is there and the suitability is explained and all of that. So I think there is an opportunity for the industry to push harder.
How so? Like, what practically? What does that look like?
I think it's like someone like me, like walking into a dealership. interested in buying a vehicle, what do you talk about first? Is your first conversation about EVs, or is your first conversation about the piece of stock that I've got that I need to get rid of next? And it's maybe about changing those dynamics slightly and incentivizing the sales more effectively for the consumer and for the retailer as well.
Do you think it's something when you go into a dealership, you're specifically looking for an EV or you're looking for a petrol car? Should it just be you're looking for a car? And that should be the language, and it shouldn't be, this one's an EV and it's got this, and this. Should it just be, this is a really high spec car and it just happens to be an EV? What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I do. Again, I'm trying less and less to say the word EV and just talk about them as vehicles. Because it's about this sort of growing the community, making you feel like you're not right. I've always worked in innovation, so I actually am drawn to innovative things, new things, confusing things, boundary pushing things. But the majority of people I know are not. They just want to feel confident in the choice that they've made. And car buying is so personal, even down to the colour of the stitching on the seat is important to a consumer. And I'm afraid, all too often in the early days, it was very much target driven. So we've got a lot of petrol and diesel to shift, but we've also got, as you described, one model of EV. And that community goes down when you go to a dealership and you can only see one model of EV. It's not for you then, is it? You probably don't have an affinity to it. And I think the more, to answer your question, things we could do is role modeling. Lots of people and lots of subliminal kind of messaging, in the sense of, if you use the word sustainability in anything, people do tend to switch off a bit. So kind of sneaking it in sideways is a nice way to kind of help people to do the good thing for clean air in cities and go EV and benefit from all the reduction in fines and the incentives to get you to do that. So I think the best thing somebody could ask me if I walked into a dealership was very much around, is there a brand you like, would be a good start, because I already know the brands I've not bought from before. Have you considered this one? It just depends how diverse that dealership is, and just being cognizant of the fact that the consumer probably knows more than you.
I mean, that's a very interesting point, just generally about vehicle sales, is, there's so much information available online. And sometimes, as a consumer walking into a dealership, you actually want the expert in the dealership to tell you something, to educate, to teach you things. But sometimes it feels like there isn't a lot else to know when you've gone in. I've made my decision. I want one of these. I'm going to get that one if the price is right. And so again, it's about making that information more readily available to the consumer and to the industry, to the dealers themselves, to make sure they have that information to hand to help a consumer make the right decision.
We touched earlier on total cost of ownership, and one thing that would be really interesting to see introduced is, obviously we've had this conversation about perception of cost versus cost, right? And so is it something that, on a retailer website or on a manufacturer website, that we have total cost of ownership calculators where you can compare insurance or calculate insurance and maintenance and servicing and fuel/electricity, and there you can have that practical look at, this is what this diesel vehicle is, this is what this electric vehicle is, and you can have that comparison, and it almost makes it then easier for the consumer to just have the answer at their fingertips almost.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and I'm going to task my development team to build that. I think
that would be a good one.
Yeah, we have had conversations.
We have, yeah.
Okay.
Because one of the major things we do is provide information to consumers through websites around the cost of purchasing a vehicle, predominantly through finance means. To add to that, actually, your total cost of ownership over a 3-year period is likely to be this, I think, is incredibly powerful.
We do it for houses. You don't buy a house without looking at your mortgage options, your bill options, your stamp duty. Getting, I call it sort of a basket shopping situation. You need to have everything in the basket before you've made your final decision. And it's agnostic when you do that. The only thing that's different is the ticket price on the brand that you chose. Everything else is available as a wide net of easy accessible data. They do exist. They do. I think ZapMap is an awesome shout out. Anybody who gets an EV should always get the ZapMap app. It is free to download and shows knocking on the door of 100,000 chargers across the UK right now. So when you're mapping your journey, ZapMap, great name, you can see where those charges are going to be. But it also has cost calculators. It also has independent reviews. It also has survey results. So when you go into a dealership, you don't want to feel hoodwinked into buying something because they've got targets. You want to go in properly informed. And let's face it, a cup of coffee and a biscuit never goes amiss.
Absolutely not.
True.
Especially on a long car drive. Absolutely not.
No.
I shall be getting one on my way home today.
So we've covered quite a lot, obviously, from total cost of ownership, some of the myths and stuff that both retailers and consumers are going for. Just as we sort of wrap the conversation up, I was hoping to give you guys the floor. If you could offer sort of one piece of advice for retailers and consumers on how they can, move forward with either their vehicle purchases or supporting the network to hit these ZEV mandates.
Let you go first, Sarah.
Thanks. I think don't fear the technology. The technology is designed for you, and if you wanted an independent voice on it, check out anything that the AA say. In fact, the majority of breakdowns that happen on the road, be that internal combustion engine or an electric vehicle, are still things like the 12-volt battery and your tyres not being in good condition. It's very rarely the ball of flames that people do love to report on, and proportionately, that is also just such a massive myth that you're going to catch fire if you drive an EV. It's one of the biggest, actually.
Completely agree. I mean, as you know, Cox Automotive, we own a battery services business. We service and we fix electric vehicle batteries, and certainly that safety element is been massively overplayed in the past. And these vehicles are completely safe. The one shout I will give to the industry is make sure your salespeople in dealerships know what they're talking about and can talk to consumers in a way that consumers understand. It's not about jargon. It's not about going mad about technology. Technology is important for some people, but other people just want a car they can get in, drive, charge up, drive again, and aren't too worried about all the bells and whistles. Understand your consumer, understand their needs, and talk to them in a way that they get, and make sure your people are properly educated.
And those are two fantastic bits of advice to end on. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had such an insightful conversation. It's fantastic to hear from both of you on this huge, huge topic. So thank you. And maybe we'll get you guys back on the podcast again.
Oh, I'd love that. Double trouble.
Double trouble. Exactly. Thank you very much, guys.
A pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for tuning in for this month's episode of the Talk Auto podcast. We have a show notes email if you guys want to get in touch, recommend any topics, or be on the podcast.
Indeed. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Alternatively, you can subscribe to the Cox Automotive Europe YouTube channel to watch the videos back.
And we will see you next month for another episode of Talk Auto.
Thanks very much.